Hey guys, welcome to Quiet History. Tonight, you are not in your own bed. You are inside a medieval castle in the heart of winter. The stone walls around you are cold, holding the chill of the night. A weak fire flickers in the corner, struggling against the dark, and outside, the wind moves slowly across the land. There is nothing to do now, nowhere to go, only to rest and let the night carry you. The cold came first, before consciousness, before thought, a living thing that pressed against Willem's face and found the small gaps where the wool blanket had shifted during the night. It crept along his cheekbone, traced the shell of his ear, and slowly pushed deeper until it reached far enough to pull him from the dark well of sleep. For a moment he resisted, clinging to the warmth trapped between his body and his wife Marta's back, between their legs, and the small, quiet forms of their children pressed against them, searching for heat. But the cold was patient and insistent. It did not hurry, and little by little awareness spread through him, slowly, steadily, like water seeping through cloth. He kept his eyes closed, not yet ready to face what he knew awaited. The cottage was silent, except the soft breathing of his family and the occasional creak of timber, tightening in the cold. The fire had died. He knew it without looking, could feel the absence of its warmth, could sense the way the cold air had settled into the space, pressing into every corner, like something that had taken hold during the night. While they slept, in the heavy, exhausted stillness of winter, the flames had consumed the last of the wood he had so carefully arranged before bed, and dwindled to almost nothing at all. Willem opened his eyes to complete darkness, not the darkness of a cloudy night, but something deeper, heavier, the kind of darkness that belongs to winter's deepest hours, when even starlight feels distant, as if the sky itself has gone still. He could see nothing, but he could feel everything. The rough wool of the blanket against his chin, worn thin from years of use and washing, the straw mattress beneath him, compressed by the weight of bodies, offering little relief from the hardened earth below, and the warmth of Marta beside him, fragile, finite, already beginning to slip away into the waiting cold. His breath rose in faint clouds, unseen, but felt against his face, the moisture already turning cold, almost as soon as it left him. He moved his fingers beneath the blanket, slowly, feeling the stiffness in his joints, the quiet resistance of his own body. Cold did this, made flesh heavy, made movement deliberate, as though each small motion required its own effort. He flexed his toes and felt the same slow reluctance, as if his body had begun to still during the night and now resisted being stirred again. Leaving the blanket was not a simple decision. He lay there for several more breaths, gathering himself, preparing for what he already knew would come. Around him, his family slept on. Marta's breathing was deep, steady, the breath of someone worn down by the day before and not yet called back to it. Their eldest daughter, Elle, pressed close to her mother for warmth. And on Willem's other side, Peter and little Anna, tangled together in the dark, small, quiet, holding on to what warmth they could find. He thought of them waking to a cold room, to no fire, to a morning already made difficult before it had even begun. That thought was enough. Slowly, carefully, Willem began to move, He slipped himself from the shared warmth, with the care of someone who understood that even a small mistake could let the cold in too quickly, could wake the children, could take more than it gave. The air struck him immediately, sharp, present, almost physical in its force. It was not simply cold, but something that pressed back, something that seemed to take as much as it could. Willem sat at the edge of the sleeping platform, his feet still lifted from the floor. As the trembling began, it started deep within him and moved outward, his body's quiet attempt to create warmth where none remained. He had slept in his undertunic and braise, as they all did in the depth of winter. But the linen offered little resistance. The cold passed through it easily, reaching his skin, drawing heat from him without effort. His clothes waited where he had left them, folded on the small stool nearby. He reached for them, moving carefully, as though the air itself resisted him. The undertunic came first, pulled slowly over his head, stiff with cold and long use. Then the outer tunic, heavier, patched in many places, where time and wear had already taken their toll. Wool hose, mended again and again, a leather belt to hold what little there was together. Each layer helped, but not enough. The cold had already settled deep, and he knew, from long experience, that warmth would not return easily, not until the fire was rebuilt, not until his body had been moving for some time. His boots waited by the door. He moved toward them slowly, across the earthen floor, his arms wrapped close to himself, still shaking. The ground beneath his feet burned with cold, sharper than ice. In summer, it might have felt smooth, even welcome. But winter changed it, turned it into something else entirely, something that seemed to take warmth from anything that touched it and give nothing back. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Willem began to make out shapes. The cottage was small, a single room, perhaps 12 feet across, with walls of wattle and daub, carefully maintained each autumn, before the cold settled in. The thatched roof rose above them, and somewhere within it, he knew frost had formed, delicate patterns of ice that would melt again when the fire returned, dripping slowly if he was not careful. A single, small window, shuttered tight against the night, and even there, frost had claimed the wood, forming thin, intricate patterns, both beautiful and unforgiving. The hearth stood along one wall, stone, worn, the quiet center of the home, and the difference between warmth and something far worse. Willem approached it slowly, with a kind of care that came from knowing its importance. He knelt on the cold stone, his knees stiff, protesting the pressure as he leaned forward into the dark. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, beneath the ash, the faintest glow, a dim red pulse, like something still holding on, not gone, not yet. A quiet sense of relief settled in him. There was still something left. He sat back slightly, considering the next step. The tinder box rested nearby, but tinder was not something to waste. If the embers could be coaxed back, it would be enough. The thought of starting again from nothing, of striking steel in the cold, of building fire from a single spark, while his family waited in the dark, was enough to slow his hands. First, the ash. He reached for the small wooden paddle and began to move it gently, carefully, clearing space, without disturbing what remained. Beneath it, The embers revealed themselves, small, stubborn, each no larger than a pea, but still alive. Oak, he remembered, the last log he had placed before sleep. Oak held its heat longer than most, and this morning it had made the difference. He reached for the kindling basket, his fingers slow, still heavy with cold, pine needles, crisp, carrying the faint scent of resin, small twigs, thin as quills, curls of wood, shaved carefully during long evenings, each piece the result of time and quiet preparation. He chose them with care. The method was not new. It had been shown to him years ago, passed down, as it always had been. He placed the smallest pieces first, leaving space for air, for heat, for the flame to find its way. Too tight, and the embers would fade. Too loose, and the warmth would never gather. He leaned closer and began to blow, gently at first, a slow, steady breath, and the embers responded, deepening in color, shifting from red towards something brighter. The ash stirred. He paused, then again, carefully. Another breath. The glow spread. The heat began to gather. His lungs tightened with the effort, but he continued, patient, steady. A thin thread of smoke appeared from one of the needles, then another, barely visible, but enough. He breathed again, longer this time, and then a flame, small, fragile, but real. It flickered between the kindling, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. It spread slowly, touching one piece, then another. Willem added more, building carefully, allowing the fire to grow at its own pace. The light pushed back the dark, and with it came warmth, faint at first, but enough for his body to notice. Once the kindling held steady, he reached for the larger wood. Even this required care. The pieces had to be placed just right, so the flame could rise and continue. He selected one, about the width of his wrist, and set it into place, slowly, beginning to rebuild what would carry them through the day. The fire grew, and with it, the light in the cottage slowly returned. Willem could begin to see more clearly now, the small space that held their lives through these long winter months. The sleeping platform, where his family still rested, raised above the cold floor, layered with straw, and their few precious blankets, a small table, 2 stools, little more than that, shelves along the wall, holding what they owned, wooden bowls, spoons worn smooth with use, the water bucket, the tinder box, and a small clay lamp, used only when oil could be spared. Above them, bundles of dried herbs hung quietly, along with strings of onions, and a few remaining links of sausage, saved from the autumn slaughter. In the corner, separated by a simple wattle partition, the animals huddled together, brought inside when the cold had first taken hold, their warmth shared, as part of the same effort to endure. He could hear them now, shifting slowly, responding to the growing light and the return of heat. The cow gave a low, quiet sound. The chickens stirred softly in their boxes. Their presence filled the air. The scent of animals, heavy but familiar, even comforting. A reminder that they were not alone in the struggle against the cold. As the fire settled, Willem moved closer, holding his hands out toward the flame. The heat touched his skin. Sharp at first, almost painful. After the depth of the cold, he turned his hand slowly, letting the warmth reach each finger, feeling life return, little by little. He turned his face as well, allowing the heat to soften the numbness in his cheeks and nose. Behind him, movement. Marta was waking, drawn by the light and by the promise of warmth. He heard the quiet shift of blankets, her careful steps, until she came to stand beside him. Without speaking, he moved slightly, making space for her at the fire. They stood together, in silence, two people who had lived through many winters, who understood that not every moment needed words. Marta wrapped a wool shawl around herself, over her thin shift, her dark hair falling loose, her face pale in the firelight. She held her hands toward the flame, as he had done, and closed her eyes, briefly, taking in the warmth. She was thin. They all were by this point in the winter, the strength of autumn long since spent in the quiet effort of staying warm, but she remained steady, capable. And Willem felt a quiet sense of gratitude for her presence beside him, for the life they held together through all of this. The water bucket sat near the door, and he already knew what he would find. The cold returned at once as he stepped away from the fire. The bucket, wooden, bound in iron, held exactly what he expected. The water had frozen solid, a hard, unmoving disk of ice. It would need to be broken, melted, made usable again. But first, he needed more layers. His cloak hung near the door. He wrapped it around himself, feeling its weight settle across his shoulders, like something protective, something steady. Gloves, stiff with cold, pulled over his hands, a wool cap drawn down over his ears, each layer a small resistance against the cold. The door stood before him, the final barrier between what warmth remained inside and the world beyond it. He lifted the wooden bar, feeling its weight, then pulled the door open. The cold that entered was different, sharper, more immediate. It carried with it the scent of snow, of ice, and the stillness of the forest. Outside, the world remained dark, though faint light had begun to gather in the east. Snow covered everything, softening the land, while making it feel unfamiliar, distant, almost unreal. The other cottages stood in silence, faint shapes against the white, with thin trails of smoke rising here and there, signs that others were waking as well. The cold struck him fully now, sharper than before, catching the breath in his chest. He stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, letting his body steady itself, before stepping forward. His boots pressed into the fresh snow, sinking slightly as the day quietly began. The woodpile was his first destination, a careful stack of logs and branches. Sheltered beneath rough thatch, snow had drifted against it in the night, and Willem bent to clear it, using his hands, his gloves quickly growing damp and cold. He pushed the snow aside, slowly, until he could reach the wood beneath. He chose each piece with care. Oak, for the slow burn, that would carry warmth through the day. Birch, for quick heat, when they needed to cook. Pine, for kindling, and for the brief brightness that could lift the weight of darker hours. He gathered what he could hold, feeling the weight of it settle in his arms, the rough bark pressing against his cloak, before turning back toward the cottage. It was only a short distance, but even those few steps were enough. The cold found its way in, through every layer, reaching for his skin, for his warmth. His face had already gone numb, his breath catching, the moisture freezing against his lip. His feet, despite wool and leather beginning to lose their feeling. This was winter, not a single moment, but a constant struggle, one that never fully loosened its hold. Inside, the cottage felt different now. The fire had begun to take hold, and the air, though still cold, was no longer empty. The children stirred, soft sounds rising from the sleeping platform as they woke to another day. Willem set the wood beside the hearth, then turned again toward the door. The water bucket waited. It would need breaking and melting before it could be used. The ice was thick, perhaps 2 inches across. He took the iron poker and struck it again and again until the surface cracked and gave way. Some pieces remained, left to melt slowly. Others he set aside, knowing that nothing could be wasted. Every drop mattered. He placed the bucket near the fire, close enough for warmth, but not so near that the wood would split. Then he turned to the animals. They needed tending as well. Water, food, and the quiet assurance that they had not been forgotten. The cow watched him, calm, patient. She had given them much already, and would again when the seasons turned. For now, her warmth alone was enough to matter. He checked her water, breaking the ice there as well. The chickens were easier, a small handful of grain scattered before them, their movements quick, even in the cold. By the time he finished, the darkness had begun to lift. A pale light crept in, through the shutter, not warm, not golden, but thin and cold. It showed everything clearly, without softening it. Marta had begun their morning meal. The stores were low, measured carefully, each portion counted. A pot rested over the fire, water slowly warming, soon to become porridge. It would not be much, but it would be warm. The children sat awake now, wrapped in blankets, watching the fire. Elsa held the younger ones close, steady, already learning what was required of her. Willem moved toward them, and for a moment he simply stayed there, holding them close, feeling their warmth, remembering why any of this mattered. Outside, the village was waking, the sound of axes, doors, voices carried faintly through the cold air, others rising, beginning again. The porridge was ready. Marta served it into wooden bowls, thin but hot. They ate slowly, holding the bowls close, drawing in what warmth they could. This was survival, not loud, not heroic, but steady, repeated, necessary. When the meal was finished, Willem rose again. The work did not wait, it never did. Wood, repairs, 100 small tasks that could not be set aside. Winter demanded it, not rest, but effort. He pulled on his outer layers once more, and though the cold still remained, something else had settled within him. The fire was burning. His family was warm. For now, they had made it through the night, and today they would endure again, tomorrow and the day after, until finally the season would break and the cold would release its hold. The grey light that filtered through the window was not truly light, only a soft lifting of the darkness, a slow shift from black to something thinner, something closer to day. Willem stood there, the wooden shutter unlatched, looking out. The cold slipped in around the frame, settling against his skin as he watched. The world beyond was quiet, covered in white, broken only by the dark shapes of cottages and the bare forms of trees at the edge of the forest. Snow had fallen again in the night, adding to what was already there, layer upon layer, since the first freeze in November. Now, in the deep of winter, the paths between homes had become narrow trenches, carved through the weight of it, walls of snow rising on either side. He closed the shutter and turned back inside. The fire flickered, casting slow shadows across the walls. The morning had already taken shape, the fire rebuilt, the meal eaten, the animals tended. Now the day stretched ahead, familiar and waiting. Marta sat nearby, her spindle turning in steady rhythm, her hands moving with quiet certainty. The children remained close to the fire, Elsa guiding the younger ones, tracing letters into the ash, learning what they could, in the only way available to them now. Willem moved to the woodpile, sorting through what remained. This was a task he returned to often, again and again, measuring, calculating, always aware of how little stood between warmth and something far worse. The pile had grown smaller. Each piece taken, each piece burned, was time spent, effort given, carried into the present moment. In summer, it was only one task among many, but now it was everything. He chose several pieces of oak, the bark rough beneath his gloves, and fed them into the fire. The flames took them quickly, wrapping, consuming, turning solid wood into heat, into light, into what they needed to endure. Nothing was wasted, nothing could be. The water bucket stood empty again. The ice he had broken earlier had melted and been used. Now it waited, needing to be filled once more. The stream was not far, but distance meant little in this cold. 200 steps, through snow, breaking ice again, hands aching, clothing dampening. It was work that could not be avoided. He layered himself again, another tunic, cloth wrapped beneath his gloves, each small effort adding protection. Marta looked up, their eyes meeting briefly. No words were needed. She understood the necessity and the risk outside. The cold pressed in at once. His breath rose in heavy clouds, hanging in the still air before fading away. The sky above remained grey, low, unchanging. He moved along a worn path, each step deliberate, his boots finding what firmness remained beneath the snow. Others were already awake, moving quietly through the morning. Old Thomas, splitting wood, each strike measured, sending small bursts of ice into the air. The widow Marjorie, scattering grain, the chickens quick to gather what they could. Children in the distance, their movement light, their voices thin in the cold. Willem lifted a hand in greeting, a nod returned. No more than that. Words were not needed here, not in this cold. The village had grown quieter, as winter deepened, as though even sound had been taken by the cold, and still the work continued. The path to the stream led beyond the village and into the edge of the forest, though forest was perhaps too generous a word. A scattered stretch of oak, ash, and birch, growing across the common land, managed carefully for generations, cut, shaped, never fully cleared, so that the wood would always return. Now, in winter, they stood bare, dark branches reaching into the grey sky, trunks damp, the moisture frozen into thin patterns of ice. The stream ran narrow, half covered in ice, except where the current moved fast enough to resist it. This was where they came for water, each day, breaking through what had formed again overnight, dipping buckets into the flow beneath. Willem could see the signs of others. Ice broken, then frozen again. Snow pressed down, darkened with mud. He set the bucket down and reached for the iron bar left nearby, worn smooth by years of use. The ice was thick, several inches at least. He struck it once, then again, until it cracked and broke apart. The sound carried through the trees, sharp, sudden, sending a crow into the air. He knelt, dipping the bucket into the water. The cold cut through even the gloves, sharp enough to sting, as if it burned instead of froze. He worked quickly, knowing how little time he had before it became dangerous. The bucket filled, and he rose again, beginning the walk back. The weight slowed him, the water shifting with each step, threatening to spill. His arms ached, his shoulders tightening under the strain. But he continued, steady, careful. Inside, the warmth struck him at once. After the cold outside, it felt almost overwhelming. He set the bucket near the fire, removing his outer layers, hanging them to dry. His hands were red, stiff, barely moving. He held them close to the flame, feeling the slow return of sensation and the quiet pain that came with it. This was the cost of water, paid each day. There was no other way. Marta had prepared a thin soup, using what remained of their stores, onions, turnips, and a few softened carrots. The smell filled the room, and Willem felt the hunger rise. They would eat soon, a small meal, enough to carry them forward. The children watched the pot, quietly, their faces pale in the firelight. While it simmered, Willem turned to his work. There was always something waiting. A shutter had cracked, letting the cold slip in. It needed sealing. He mixed mud and straw together, slowly, working it to the right consistency, then pressed it into place, smoothing it carefully, so it would hold. His hands moved without hesitation, guided by repetition, by memory. The children watched, asking questions, their voices small but curious. He answered patiently, knowing this, too, was part of survival. These were the things passed down, not in words alone, but in doing. The knowledge to keep a home intact, to hold back the cold, to repair what broke. Without it, nothing lasted long. The soup was ready. They gathered together, Marta dividing it evenly, careful, as always. It was thin, but warm. They ate slowly, stretching the moment, using what bread they had to gather every drop. As they ate, Willem's thoughts drifted towards something distant, towards spring, the thaw, the sound of water running freely again, the first green pushing through the earth, birds returning, the air no longer biting at every breath. It was a dangerous thought, but a quiet one, because for now, winter remained. February still ahead, the hardest stretch, when stores ran low and the cold held strongest. Then March, uncertain, offering hope and taking it back again. Only later would they begin to believe it. For now, there was only this and the work that never stopped. The meal finished slowly, each spoonful taken with care. The bowls eventually set aside, to be cleaned later when water could be spared. Willem returned to his work, moving without urgency, but without pause. There was always something waiting. This time, it was kindling. He settled himself near the fire, close enough to feel the warmth, but not so close that it dulled his hands. He took a larger piece of wood, steadying it against his knee, and drew the blade of his knife slowly along its surface. Thin curls began to form, pale and dry, falling lightly into his lap. Each shaving mattered, Each one would one day catch flame, bridging the fragile space between dying embers and new fire. The knife itself was old, worn down through years of use. It had belonged to his father, and before that, to his grandfather. The handle had long since lost its shape, smoothed by countless hands. The blade narrowed from sharpening, again and again. But it still held its edge, and in Willem's hand, it moved with quiet certainty. The wood gave way beneath it, each stroke precise, each movement familiar. Across the room, Marta continued her spinning. The wheel turned steadily, a soft, repeating rhythm that filled the space between other sounds. The wool passed through her fingers, shifting slowly from loose fibre into something stronger. Thread that would one day become cloth, and cloth that would become warmth, or something to trade. Her hands never stopped moving, even now, in the depth of winter, when the outside world had slowed. Her work continued. The children had grown quiet. The warmth of the fire and the weight of the day had begun to pull them downward. Elsa sat near her mother, a smaller spindle in her hands, copying what she saw, her movements uncertain but determined. Peter and Anna lay closer to the hearth, their bodies curled together, not fully asleep, but drifting. Outside, the light had already begun to fade. Willem noticed it without needing to look directly. The way the room shifted, the way the fire's glow became more dominant. Winter days were short, brutally so. The sun never fully claimed the sky, and what little light came did not stay. He turned slightly toward the window, measuring it, calculating. An hour, perhaps two, enough time for one more trip. He set the wood aside and began dressing again. The outer layers had not fully dried, but there was no waiting for that. Wool, leather, each piece pulled back into place. The door opened with a slow creak, and the cold rushed in at once. The fire flickered, bending slightly, reacting to the shift. Outside, the snow had begun again, thick flakes falling without sound, settling into what was already there. Willem stepped out, the cold meeting him immediately, pressing in, as though it had been waiting. The woodpile stood dark against the snow, partially buried, but still reachable. He gathered more this time, more than usual. The falling snow made the decision for him. It would not get easier later. The weight built in his arms, pressing down, forcing him to adjust his grip, but he carried it anyway, back inside. He stacked it carefully, larger pieces below, smaller ones above, arranged so they could be reached easily in the darkness of early morning. This mattered. Even small efficiencies made a difference. Evening had arrived fully now, the outside world fading, the cottage drawing inward. Marta set aside her spinning, turning toward the fire once more. Another meal, thin, stretched carefully, prepared from what remained. Willem took his place on the stool, the cloak in his hands. The fabric was worn, weakened in places, and needed mending. He worked slowly, threading the needle, pulling it through, securing each patch. The stitches were not perfect, but they would hold. And that was enough. The children had woken again, drawn back by the promise of food. Elsa began telling a story, one she had heard many times before, but told now in her own voice. The others listened, their attention steady, as the familiar tale unfolded. Willem listened as well, though only partly, the words moving through him like something already known. These stories mattered. they held something together, something beyond the work, beyond the cold. The meal came again, shared in quiet, the fire the only constant sound. Outside, the wind had risen. It pressed against the cottage, testing its edges, searching for weakness, but the walls held, as they always had. When the meal was done, the final task began. The animals checked, water adjusted, the fire built higher, the door secured, the shutters closed tight, nothing left undone. Then, finally, rest. They climbed back onto the platform, gathering close, sharing what warmth they could. Willem paused once more, checking the fire. Winter took things slowly. That was part of what made it so hard to speak against. It did not always arrive like a storm, or announce itself with one terrible moment. More often, it took by degrees, a little more wood from the pile, a little more grain from the sack, a little more strength from the body, a little more patience from the mind. It took softness from hands, turning skin rough and cracked. It took color from faces, leaving them pale in the firelight. It took ease from movement, making every trip outdoors feel longer than it was. It took variety from meals. By this point in the season, there was little surprise left in the pot. What remained was what remained. Stored roots, hard bread, oats stretched thin with water, a little fat if they were fortunate, a little salt if any still remained. It took comfort from the air itself, even inside. The cottage was never wholly free of winter. The fire pushed back what it could, but never all of it. There was always some corner still cold, some draught under a door, some wall that held the night within it. It took time as well, not by shortening the day alone, but by filling every hour with necessity. Water had to be fetched, wood had to be gathered, clothes had to be mended, shutters sealed, animals checked, food measured, ash cleared, kindling shaved. Nothing could wait long, nothing could be neglected, and winter took from everyone equally in one way. It demanded attention. The old felt it in their bones, children felt it in their hunger, women felt it in the endless work of keeping order indoors, men felt it in the labor beyond the door, and in the worry they carried back inside with them. Even the village itself seemed reduced by it. Paths narrower, voices fewer, movements slower, faces seen less often except at a distance or in passing, or on Sundays if weather allowed. And yet, for all that winter took, it also revealed certain things. Who shared when food was low, who checked on a neighbor, who repaired before something failed, who kept calm when the weather worsened, who endured without complaint, who had prepared well, who had not. In that way, winter was like fire. It stripped things down, left only what could last. Willem knew this without ever putting it into words. He knew it in his hands, in his habits, in the way he judged wood by weight and weather by smell, and the condition of the roof by the angle of a drip. Winter had taught him these things, as it had taught his father, and his father before him, not kindly, but completely. And each day they endured it. They learned again what could not be wasted, what must be protected, and what truly mattered when the season was at its hardest. Ensuring it would hold, then settled beside them. The room grew quiet again, the fire low, the breathing steady. Outside, the storm continued, snow falling, wind moving across the land, but inside, for now, they were warm, and that was enough. Sleep came slowly, pulling him down, deeper into the quiet, his final thought of spring, distant but certain. The winter would end. It always did. The fire had settled into a low, steady glow, no longer bright, but still alive. Willem didn't fall asleep immediately. His body was still, but his mind remained awake, listening. The sounds of the night were different now. The wood shifting, the soft movement of the fire, the wind pressing gently against the walls. Somewhere outside, something moved, distant but present. He did not react. This was not unusual. Winter belonged to more than just men. He adjusted slightly beneath the blankets, feeling the shared warmth beside him. This, more than anything, was what mattered. Not the work, not the cold, but this quiet moment together. Outside, the village lay buried beneath snow. The paths had disappeared. The fields blended into the horizon. Everything softened and hidden beneath white. A few faint trails of smoke rose slowly into the night, each one marking a home, a family, enduring as they were. No voices carried now, no movement between homes. The village had gone still, resting, waiting for morning. Only the wind remained, moving quietly through the spaces between the cottages, brushing against wood and snow. A reminder that winter had not yet released its hold. Before dawn, the cottage changed again, not suddenly, but in small ways that could be felt more than seen. The fire had sunk lower, its glow softer now, its warmth no longer reaching as far into the room. The air near the walls had grown colder. The corners of the cottage felt distant again, claimed once more by winter. Willem didn't fully wake, but he shifted beneath the blankets, responding to the change as a man does who has lived too long with cold not to sense its movement. Beside him, Marta remained still. The children too, drawn deep into the heavy sleep that came only after exhaustion. Their breathing was the gentlest sound in the room, that and the faint settling of the embers, a soft collapse now and then, a whisper of ash, the smallest red pulse still holding on in the dark. The blankets had grown heavy with the night, with breath, with use, with the gathered warmth of bodies pressed close together. Willem could feel the rough weave against his hands, against his chin, against the side of his face where the fabric had folded over itself. There was a smell to the room that belonged only to winter nights like this. Smoke, wool, straw, cold air, damp wood slowly drying near the hearth, the faint animal warmth from beyond the partition, and beneath it all the quiet scent of people who had worked hard through a long day and had fallen asleep before their bodies were truly ready to rest. Somewhere in the roof, a tiny sound, a bead of melted frost, perhaps loosened by the fire's earlier heat, falling softly from the underside of the thatch, not enough to matter, only enough to be heard in a room that had gone so still. Outside, the world remained hidden, no birds yet, no footsteps, no voices between cottages, no sound of tools, only that deep hour before morning, when the night seemed longest and the cold most certain. Willem drifted there, half asleep, half aware, held between warmth and want, between rest and the knowledge that morning would come soon enough. And still, for those few moments more, the cottage remained quiet, the fire remained alive, His family remained close, and that, for the time being, was enough. But waited, the kind that endured. Beneath the blankets, the warmth remained, held close, shared between bodies. But even that required stillness, required patience. Any movement, any shift, let the cold return. And so they remained as they were, breathing slowly, resting where they lay. Outside, the wind had calmed, the storm had passed, leaving behind only silence, a silence that felt complete. No branches moving, no snow falling, only stillness, the kind of stillness that came only in the coldest hours. Just before morning began its slow return, Willem's breathing deepened again, his body settling fully now. The fire continued its quiet work, holding the space just enough, and the night continued, unbroken. The night settled deeper, not all at once, but slowly, as if the darkness itself was thickening. The fire gave less now, its light dimmer, its warmth softer, but still present. Willem stirred, not waking fully, but shifting, responding to something he could not name. The cold had changed. It was no longer the sharp bite of early night, but something heavier, deeper, settling into the space around them. It pressed gently against the walls, against the roof, against the earth beneath them, the kind of cold that did not rush, but waited, the kind that endured. Beneath the blankets, the warmth remained, held close, shared between bodies. But even that required stillness, required patience. Any movement, any shift, let the cold return. And so they remained as they were, breathing slowly, resting where they lay. Outside, the wind had calmed, the storm had passed, leaving behind only silence, a silence that felt complete, no branches moving, no snow falling, only stillness, the kind of stillness that came only in the coldest hours. Just before morning began its slow return, Willem's breathing deepened again, his body settling fully now. The fire continued its quiet work, holding the space just enough, and the night continued, unbroken. The afternoon light, such as it was, had already begun to fade, slowly, almost unnoticed. When Willem first sensed the change beyond the shuttered window, it was not yet late, not truly. And yet winter did not follow the same rules as other seasons. The hours of daylight seemed to gather close together, shrinking, giving way little by little to the long quiet stretch of night. He had been working with his hands, the leather stiff from the cold, resistant in a way that made each movement slower than it should have been. For a moment, he let the work rest in his lap, his fingers still, before rising and moving toward the window. When he unlatched the shutter, only slightly, the world outside had already softened. The light had dimmed into something deeper, something quieter, the pale grey settling into a darker shade, like charcoal brushed lightly across the land. Snow covered the ground in an even stillness, its edges no longer sharp, its surface blending gently into shadow. Here and there, faint glows appeared, small lights from other cottages, steady and warm, flickering softly through narrow gaps and imperfect shutters. Smoke rose slowly into the air, thin at first, then fading, carried away by a wind that could not be seen but could be felt, even from within. The cold had deepened, not suddenly, but gradually, the kind of cold that settled in layers, pressing gently against the walls, reminding everything and everyone of its quiet presence. Willem closed the shutter again, and when he turned back, the fire was there, just as it had been, steady, unchanged, waiting. It burned with a quiet certainty, the flames moving in slow patterns over the wood, casting a soft orange glow that reached outward, touching the walls, the floor, the small spaces in between. The shadows moved with it, never still, never hurried, shifting gently as the light breathed. In the warmer months, the fire was only a tool, something useful, something necessary. But now, in the heart of winter, it was more than that. It was something constant, something to return to. Marta had already settled near the hearth. Her spinning wheel turned in a slow, steady rhythm, the soft creak of wood, the faint whisper of thread repeating again and again, until the sound no longer asked to be noticed. Her hands moved with quiet familiarity, guiding the wool without hesitation, without thought, as though the motion belonged not just to her, but to time itself. The firelight rested gently across her face, steady and warm, while everything else around her seemed to fade into softer edges. Nearby, the children shifted in their own quiet restlessness, not loud, not chaotic, just small movements, small voices, rising and falling like the fire itself. Elsa guided them as best she could, her presence calm, familiar, while Peter and Anna followed along, their energy slowly softening as the evening settled deeper into the room. From time to time, Marta would speak, only a word or two, just enough to bring the sound back down, just enough to return the room to its quiet rhythm. The cottage held everything close, the warmth, the sound, the stillness. Nothing rushed, nothing needed to. Willem returned to his place by the fire. The leather rested once more in his hands, no longer something to solve, but something to move through, slowly, steadily, one motion at a time. The work did not demand much of him, only presence, the small, repeated movements, the gentle pull of thread, the quiet resistance of the material, all of it settling into a rhythm that matched the room around him. And as he worked, his thoughts came and went, without urgency, without weight. Things that might have once felt heavy, now felt distant, softened, like sounds heard from far away. They did not need to be followed. They did not need to be solved. They simply passed through, and what remained was the warmth of the fire, steady against his face, the faint scent of the stew, rising slowly from the hearth, the soft turning of the wheel, the quiet presence of his family, and the simple, unhurried feeling of being exactly where he was meant to be. The stew had been quietly preparing itself for hours, long before the light began to fade. Marta had started it at midday, adding each small ingredient with care, never rushing, allowing time to do what time always did. The pot began with water, drawn from the stream, warmed slowly until a faint steam rose from its surface, soft and steady. Then the barley, a small handful, enough to swell gently as it absorbed the warmth, softening, expanding, becoming something more than it had been. The vegetables followed: turnips, cut small, simple and pale, onions, sliced thin, their scent rising slowly as they softened into the broth, and a few carrots, carefully saved, kept in the coldest corner of the cottage, waiting for a moment like this. Each piece was added without hurry, without waste. A small portion of salt pork came next, no larger than a thumb, yet enough to lend its richness to the whole. It would not be eaten, not yet, only shared, its flavour moving quietly through the stew, before being lifted out again, saved for another day. Above them, bundles of herbs hung in stillness, thyme and sage. Marta reached for them only when the time was right, adding them near the end, allowing their scent to drift gently into the air, filling the cottage in a way that felt both familiar and comforting. The pot hung over the fire, suspended by iron and chain, swaying ever so slightly, responding to the small movements of heat rising beneath it. From time to time, Marta would stir, slow circles, nothing hurried, tasting, adjusting, then letting it rest again. There was no need to rush. The stew would be ready when it was ready. Already, its scent had begun to settle into the room, warm, steady, drawing quiet attention without asking for it. Hunger was there, as it often was, not sharp, not overwhelming, just present, a quiet reminder that the day had passed and the evening had begun. Outside, the darkness had fully arrived, not all at once, but gradually, until there was nothing left to see beyond the walls. The world beyond the cottage had faded into something distant, something imagined more than observed, cold, still, waiting. But inside, everything remained close. The firelight stretched across the room, touching the beams above, the worn walls, the small, familiar objects that never seemed to move, yet always felt alive in their presence. Nothing had changed, and because of that, everything felt steady. Elsa's voice continued softly in the background. The stories she told moved gently, not with urgency, but with rhythm, rising and falling, just enough to hold attention, and then release it again. Peter and Anna leaned close, their movements growing smaller now, their energy settling into the warmth of the room. There was no need for much, only the sound of her voice, and the quiet space around it. Willem listened, not to follow every word, but simply to hear it, the familiar tone, the pauses, the soft rise and fall of something known. It was enough. Marta had set aside the wheel, the steady turning replaced now by something smaller, quieter. A piece of mending rested in her hands, the fabric moving gently beneath her fingers, the needle passing through with soft, repeated motion. Nothing rushed, nothing needed to. The wind outside made itself known now, not loudly, but steadily, a low sound, rising and falling, brushing against the walls, searching for any space it could find. It reminded them, gently, that beyond the warmth, there was something else, something colder, something constant. But the walls held, they always had, and the fire continued, just as before, steady, unchanged, reliable. Willem finished his work without noticing the moment it was done. The leather rested quietly in his hands, no longer something to fix, only something completed. He set it aside, his fingers moved slightly, easing the stiffness, not with effort, just with time. They had done their work, and that was enough. He rose slowly, moving toward the fire once more. Another piece of wood was added, carefully, without hurry. The flames responded in their own way, reaching, shifting, growing just slightly brighter as they welcomed the new fuel. For a moment he stood there, hands open to the warmth, not thinking, not planning, only feeling the quiet heat as it settled into him, slowly, gently, pushing away the cold that lingered deep within. And in that moment, there was nothing else that needed to be done. Nothing waiting, nothing urgent, only the fire, the warmth, the quiet rhythm of the room, and the slow, steady passing of time. The stew was nearly ready, not all at once, but slowly, as it had been from the beginning. Marta moved quietly, setting out the wooden bowls one by one, placing them carefully upon the small table. There were 5, each one worn smooth, shaped over years of use, their surfaces softened by time and hands and water. She placed the spoons beside them, just as worn, just as familiar. Nothing new, nothing needed to be. There were no other tools at the table, only what they had always used, only what was enough. The fire continued to burn behind her, steady, unchanged, as she lifted the pot slightly, letting it settle before serving. The children began to gather, not quickly, but with quiet eagerness, drawn by the warmth and the scent that had been filling the room for so long. Willem took his place, as he always did, without ceremony, without thought, just as part of the rhythm. Marta began to serve, each movement slow, measured, careful. The ladle dipped, lifted, poured, again and again, until each bowl held its portion, not large, not overflowing, but warm and enough. They began to eat. No one rushed. There was no need. Each spoonful was taken slowly, the warmth of it spreading gently, settling into the body, softening what had been tight, easing what had been tired. The broth was rich in its own quiet way. The vegetables soft, yielding without resistance. Everything simple, everything familiar. Across the table, the children ate in their own rhythm, small movements, steady, repeated, not speaking much now, only the quiet sound of spoons and breath and the fire behind them. Marta remained standing, as she often did, watching, not with urgency, but with care, ready, if needed. Though there was little more to give, and still, it was enough. Willem ate slowly, not thinking, not measuring, only present in the warmth of the meal, the quiet of the room, the nearness of those around him. The firelight moved gently across their faces, softening everything it touched, nothing sharp, nothing harsh, only warmth and shadow, shifting together. Time passed without being noticed. The bowls grew empty, little by little, each one scraped clean, not from hunger alone, but from habit, from knowing that nothing was meant to be left behind. When the meal was finished, the table was cleared quietly. No rush, no excess, only the simple movement of hands, stacking, setting aside, leaving what could wait for another time. And once again, they returned to the fire, drawn back to it as they always were. The space near the hearth grew full, but not crowded, each person finding their place without needing to choose it. This was the part of the evening that asked nothing more of them. No work that could not wait, no task that demanded attention, only time. Marta returned to the wheel, though more slowly now, the motion softer, the rhythm quieter, the sound blending into the room, until it became part of the stillness itself. Willem took up a small piece of wood, not as work, not as effort, just something to move his hands slowly, steadily. The knife passed through the surface, shaving thin curls, each one falling gently, adding to the small pile at his feet. There was no urgency in it, only repetition, only rhythm. Across from him, Elsa worked quietly. Her hands moved with care, guiding the thread through cloth. each stitch placed with attention, but without strain. The pattern grew slowly, not something to finish, but something to continue, something to return to. Near the fire, Beta and Anna had grown still. The warmth had found them. The food had settled. Their bodies leaned into one another, small and quiet, their movements fading, their voices gone. Only the soft rise and fall of breath remained. Now and then, a small shift, a quiet murmur, and then stillness again. Willem watched them, not with worry, not with thought, only with a quiet awareness, a softness that did not need to be named. They were there, close, safe, and for now, that was enough. The wind continued outside, moving across the walls, brushing against the edges of the cottage. A low sound, steady, constant. But it did not enter. It did not disturb what was inside. The fire still burned, the room still held, and everything within it moved at its own slow, steady pace, unhurried, unchanged, exactly as it needed to be. The fire continued to burn, just as it always had, steady, consuming what it was given, turning wood into warmth, into light, into something softer. The flames moved without hurry, rising, settling, shifting gently against the quiet of the room. Shadows followed along the walls, never still, never fixed, forming shapes that came and went without needing to be understood. They did not ask to be followed. They simply were. Outside, the wind remained, a low, constant sound, moving across the cottage, brushing against its edges, rising and falling in slow, uneven patterns. Now and then, something else could be heard beneath it, a distant crack, softened by snow, a far-off call, carried through the night, or the quiet settling of wood and earth, adjusting to the cold. These sounds did not disturb the room. They belonged to the world beyond, and the world beyond could remain where it was. Inside, everything was still. Willem's hands moved for a time longer, slow, familiar, the needle passing through wool, the thread following, each motion quieter than the last. There was no need to finish, no need to hurry, only the gentle rhythm of movement and the space between each one. And then, without marking the moment, the work came to rest. His hands became still. The cloak lay quietly beside him. Nothing more was needed. The thought of the seasons drifted through him, not as something to follow, but as something known. Winter, turning slowly, without asking. Spring, waiting, as it always did. Each season moving into the next, without effort, without interruption, just as it always had, just as it always would. And in that knowing, there was nothing to solve, nothing to hold on to, only the quiet certainty that things would continue, whether noticed or not. Nearby, the children had already slipped into sleep, their breathing soft, steady, rising and falling without thought, curled together, close to the warmth, without awareness of the cold beyond the walls. Marta moved gently among them, her hands careful, adjusting the blanket, tucking it closer, ensuring the warmth remained where it was needed. She met Willem's eyes for a moment, a small smile, quiet, familiar. And then she returned to stillness. The room grew softer, the fire lower, the sounds fewer. Willem stood, slowly, without urgency, his body moving as it needed to, not quickly, not with purpose, only as part of the evening's natural close. At the door, he paused, opening it only slightly. The cold entered at once, sharp, clean, brief. Snow fell without sound, small and constant, disappearing as it touched the ground. The night stretched outward, vast, quiet, without edge. He did not stay long. There was nothing to see, nothing that needed to be seen. And so he closed the door again, sealing the warmth inside, returning to what was already enough. The fire was tended once more, not built, not stirred, only arranged, gently, so that it would continue, slowly, through the night. Ash drawn close, wood placed with care, a quiet preparation for hours yet to come. The difference between flame and ember, between warmth held and warmth lost, was small, and so it was done with care. Marta had already prepared the sleeping place, blankets laid out, simple, worn, but warm, waiting. Together they moved the children, one by one, without waking them. Small bodies lifted, carried, settled again, each movement soft, uninterrupted, as though sleep itself guided the motion. And then, at last, they lay down as well, close, together, the warmth shared between them, held quietly in the space beneath the blankets. The fire had lowered now, no longer bright, only steady, a soft glow, breathing gently in the darkness. The cottage grew still, not silent, but quiet enough. The soft crackle of embers, the slow rhythm of breathing, the faint movement of wind beyond the walls, nothing more, nothing needed. And as Willem lay there was no thought of tomorrow, no weight, no urgency, only the quiet feeling of warmth, of stillness, of being held in a moment that asked nothing more of him. And slowly, without effort, without notice, sleep came. At first, there was no clear sign that the night was ending, only a slight thinning of the dark, a softness at the edge of the shutter, a sense, more than a sight, that the world outside had begun to change. Then came the first small sound, not from inside the cottage, but from somewhere beyond it, a bird, just once, thin and uncertain in the cold air. It was not song, not fully, only a small living note sent out into the frozen morning, as if testing whether the world would answer. Willem heard it through sleep without waking fully. A sound so slight another man might have missed it. But winter made listeners of everyone. It taught people to hear what mattered. After that, other signs followed, not quickly, not all together. A faint shift in the sky, the dark no longer complete, the snow outside beginning to reflect what little light there was. Then, somewhere in the village, the first thread of smoke. A family in another cottage had stirred before the rest. Another pair of hands had reached for kindling in the dark. Another morning fire had begun its work. Soon there would be more. One chimney, then another still, until the village would seem to breathe together, each home sending its own thin sign upward into the pale winter dawn. This too was part of survival, not only fire itself, but the knowledge that others nearby were rising to meet the same cold, others hauling water, others breaking ice, others standing close to the hearth with red hands turned toward the flame. The morning did not come with colour, not yet, only with greys, soft whites, the dark brown of wood and bare branches, the faint blue of frozen light. But even this was enough to mark the turning of the hours. Night had not been endless after all. It had only felt that way while it was upon them. And now, very slowly, the village began returning to itself, A shutter opened, a door moved on its hinges. Somewhere a dog barked once, then fell silent. The world was waking, carefully, reluctantly, but undeniably. And with it came that familiar truth known by everyone who endured such winters. They had made it through another night. The cold that came in the third week of February was different. Not sudden, not sharp in a single moment, but deeper, quieter, something that seemed to settle slowly, not just against the body, but through it. Willem felt it before he fully woke, a presence more than a sensation, already there, waiting, filling the small space of the cottage before his eyes had even opened. His breath rose into the darkness, soft clouds forming and fading, visible even in the faint glow of the embers. When he shifted slightly, just enough to move his hand from beneath the blankets, he felt the wall beside him, cold, so cold that frost had formed there. Small crystals, delicate, still, unmoving. He remained where he was for a time, not sleeping, not fully awake, only resting in the shared warmth around him. Marta beside him, the children close, all gathered together, without thought, without decision, simply drawn inward, toward what warmth remained. The blankets held what they could, though the cold moved slowly through them, finding its way in, not with force, but with patience. There was no need to rush. The fire would need tending, it always did. And so, after a while, without marking the moment, he began to move, slowly, carefully. The air met him at once, cold and still, pressing gently against his skin as he rose. The cottage was darker than usual. When he reached the shutter, his hands moving without needing to think, he found it held in place. Snow had gathered there in the night, pressing inward, filling the space where light might have entered. He pushed against it, not quickly, just enough, again and again, until it gave way. The light beyond was faint, muted, the world outside no longer clear, no longer familiar in detail, only shapes, softened, blended together beneath the weight of snow and sky. Nothing moved, nothing needed to. He closed the shutter again, leaving it as it was. The fire waited, low now, quiet, the embers resting beneath a thin layer of ash. They had not gone out. They never fully did, only needed time and a little care to return. He knelt beside it, his hands moving slowly, placing wood, shifting what remained, giving the fire what it needed to continue. The process was unhurried. There was no other way, and slowly. The glow deepened. A small flame appeared, then another. The fire breathing again, steady, familiar, returning to what it had always been. Willem stayed there for a while, hands extended toward the warmth, not thinking, not measuring, only letting the heat reach him, slowly, gently, working its way inward. Behind him, Marta stirred, not quickly, just enough to wake. She moved to join him without words, standing beside the fire, sharing the same quiet space, the same steady warmth. There was no need to speak. Everything was already understood. The morning moved slowly. Water in the bucket had stilled, held in place by the cold. Willem worked at it patiently, warming the iron, touching it to the surface, allowing the ice to soften little by little. There was no way to rush it, only to continue. And so he did. The animals shifted in their corner, small movements, quiet sounds. He brought them what he could, water, grain, each motion simple, each one enough. The children woke slowly, not all at once, small movements beneath the blankets, a quiet stirring, then stillness again. Until at last they rose, wrapped again in layers, held close within what warmth remained. The morning meal was simple, warm, enough. They ate without speaking much, not from worry, not from thought, only from the quiet weight of the morning, the stillness that the cold had brought with it. And after, Willem stood once more by the window, looking out, not searching for answers, not measuring what could not yet be known, only observing what was there, the snow, the stillness, the quiet shape of the world, resting beneath it all. The day would come, as it always did, and whatever it held would unfold in its own time. There was no need to hurry toward it. Marta understood without needing to be told. She moved quietly, gathering what they had, preparing him in the same way she always did, one layer at a time, a tunic, then another, placed over it, the heavier cloak wrapped close, drawn tight and held in place, cloth wound slowly around his hands, around his feet, each layer added with care, not rushed, not forced. The scarf came last, drawn up over his face, leaving only his eyes to the cold air, each movement familiar, each one repeated from other mornings, other winters, until at last there was nothing more to add. The weight of it settled around him, heavy but steady, holding warmth where it could, holding it for as long as it would remain. He reached for the rope, coiling it without thought, the motion simple, practiced. The axe followed, lifted easily, not as something to use, only something to carry, in case it was needed. The door waited. When he opened it, slowly, the snow pressed inward, resisting at first, then giving way, little by little, and the cold met him, not as a sudden force, but as something complete, already there, already present, filling the space beyond the threshold. He stepped through, and the door closed behind him. Inside, the warmth remained. Outside, the world was quiet. The snow stretched across everything, softening edges, covering what had been known. Nothing sharp, nothing clear, only shapes and stillness. The sled lay beneath the snow, hidden, waiting where it had been left. He found it slowly, brushing away the surface, clearing it piece by piece, until the wood beneath revealed itself again. There was no need to rush. The work would take as long as it needed, and so he moved, one step, then another, each movement slow, deliberate, lifting through the depth of snow, then settling again. The sled followed behind him, sometimes catching, sometimes gliding, its motion uneven, but steady enough. The village remained still, no voices, no movement, only the quiet presence of the cottages, half hidden beneath the pale weight of snow. Willem did not stop. There would be time, later, for other things. For now, there was only this path, and the movement along it. The distance stretched longer than it had before, not because it had changed, but because everything moved more slowly now, each step taking time, each breath rising, then fading into the air around him. And still, he continued, until the shapes of trees began to appear, faint at first, then clearer, dark lines rising from the white. The forest waited, just as it always had, still, unmoving. He stepped within it, leaving the open space behind. The air felt different here, quieter somehow, held between the trees, softened by their presence. The ground beneath was uneven, hidden beneath snow, but he moved carefully, not with urgency, only with attention. Each step tested, then taken, each movement steady, nothing rushed, nothing forced. He paused for a moment, resting against the trunk of a tree, not from strain, but simply because the body asked for stillness. And in that stillness, there was nothing else, no sound, beyond the faint shift of snow, no movement, beyond his own breath, only the quiet presence of the forest, resting as it was. When he moved again, it was slow, without thought, searching, not quickly, not with effort, only noticing what was already there, a branch, low, still. He reached for it, testing it gently. It gave, not all at once, but gradually, until it broke free. The sound brief, sharp, then gone again. The forest returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened, and Willem remained there, holding the branch, the moment already passing, settling quietly into what came next. The branch was long, solid, good wood. He brought it back to the sled, securing it with the rope. The motion steady, familiar, done without thought. Then he returned again, and again. The work continued in its quiet rhythm, finding, breaking, carrying, securing, each movement flowing into the next, without hurry, without pause. The pile grew slowly, not all at once, piece by piece, enough. The effort warmed him, not suddenly, but gradually, a slow spreading warmth beneath the layers, pushing back the deeper cold, if only for a time. He could feel it in his hands, in his chest, in the steady rise of breath. And still, he moved carefully. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. The forest remained quiet around him, still, unchanging, until a sound, sharp, brief. He paused, not with fear, but with attention, listening as the sound faded, followed by another, softer, and then stillness again. A branch, somewhere deeper in the trees, giving way, falling, and then nothing more. The forest returned to itself, as it always did. Willem stood for a moment longer, not reacting, not holding onto the sound, only allowing it to pass. And then he moved again. The sled was filled, not completely, but enough for what was needed, enough for now. He stood beside it, resting briefly, his breath moving slowly, rising and fading in the cold air. A small piece of bread was brought out, held for a moment, then eaten slowly, not quickly, not all at once, only what was needed. And when it was finished, he did not remain still for long. The cold returned quickly when the body stopped, and so he continued. The rope was lifted once more. The sled followed. The journey back began. It was slower now, heavier, each step sinking deeper, lifting again, then settling. A steady motion, repeated again and again. The path behind him had softened, partially filled, no longer clear, but still there, still enough to follow. His breath moved in rhythm with each step, in and out, clouds forming, then disappearing. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. There was only the next step, and then the next. At times, he paused, not from urgency, not from alarm, only to stand still, to let the body settle, to feel the quiet return for a moment, then again. He moved. The cold pressed in gently, always present, never leaving. But the movement continued, slow, steady, unbroken. The world remained the same, white, soft, without edge, until gradually, almost without noticing, shapes began to return, faint at first, then clearer, the outline of the village, dark against the pale ground, still, waiting. The distance shortened, not quickly, but with time. each step bringing him closer, though it did not need to be measured. There was no need to count, only to continue. The cottage appeared among the others, familiar, unchanged. A thin line of smoke rising, steady, quiet. The fire within still alive. He moved toward it, not faster, not harder, only forward. The sled followed behind him, just as it had before, and the path beneath his feet, though softened by snow, remained enough to carry him home. The final steps toward the door were the slowest, not because the distance had changed, but because the body had begun to ease, to release what it had been holding. The wall of the cottage came close, solid, familiar. He reached it, steadying himself there for a moment, not falling, only pausing. And then the door opened. Marta was there, already waiting. Her hands found him at once, steady, certain, guiding him inside without words. The door closed behind them, and the cold remained outside. The warmth within the cottage met him slowly, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference, enough to know he had returned. The layers were removed one by one, not quickly, only as needed. Cloth unwound, cloak loosened, each movement careful, practiced, guided more by habit than thought. The children watched quietly, not afraid, only still, taking in the moment in their own way. Willem sat near the fire, not too close, just close enough. The warmth reached him gradually, moving inward, returning where it had been held back. There was feeling again, not sharp, not overwhelming, just present, a quiet awareness, returning slowly to hands, to feet, to breath. Marta wrapped his hands, his feet, her movements gentle, steady, nothing rushed, nothing forced, only time, doing what it always did. A bowl was placed in his hands, warm, simple. The broth rose in soft steam. The scent familiar, grounding, steady. He drank slowly, each breath settling, each moment stretching just a little longer than the last. Around him, the room returned to its rhythm. The fire moved quietly. The children drew closer. The space held them all, just as it always had. Outside, the wind continued, but it no longer mattered. He remained by the fire for a long while, not measuring the time, not thinking of what had passed, only resting, allowing the warmth to settle, allowing the body to return to itself. And when he rose again, it was slowly, without strain. The sled still waited. The wood still needed to be brought inside. And so he moved once more, not with effort, not with urgency, only with the same steady rhythm that had carried him there, and back again, piece by piece. The wood was brought in, stacked carefully, each one placed with quiet intention, each one enough. The pile grew, not quickly, but steadily, and when it was done, the door was closed once more, the fire fed, the room returned. That night they gathered close, the warmth held between them, shared, quiet. The fire burned with a steady glow, not bright, not low, just enough to fill the room, to soften the edges of the world beyond. The walls creaked softly, as they always did. The wind moved outside, as it always would, but inside, everything remained still. Willem sat among them, the weight of the day no longer sharp, only present in a distant way, a quiet awareness, not something to hold on to, only something that had passed. There was no need to think of it further, only to rest. The days that followed moved slowly. The cold remained, steady, unchanging, pressing gently against the edges of everything. But within the cottage, The fire continued. The wood held. The warmth stayed. Time passed as it always did, and little by little, without announcement, without notice, the cold began to ease, not all at once, only slightly, then a little more, until breathing felt softer, until the air no longer pressed so firmly against the lungs, until the world outside began to return, shape by shape, sound by sound. The winter was not gone. It remained, quiet, waiting. But something had shifted, something small, something enough, and within the cottage, nothing needed to change. The fire still burned, the family remained close, and the slow, steady rhythm of their days continued, just as it always had. The night the cold settled deepest, Willem woke without knowing why. There was no sound, no movement, only a stillness, so complete. It seemed to fill the space around him. He lay there for a time, not fully awake, not fully asleep, only aware. His breath moved slowly, rising and fading into the darkness, soft clouds forming, then disappearing again. The air felt different, heavier, quieter, as though everything within the cottage had grown still, resting beneath something unseen. The cold was there, not pressing suddenly, not forcing its way in, but present, already settled, already part of everything. Beside him, Marta stirred slightly. Her hand found his beneath the blankets, her fingers cool but steady. He did not move. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. The children remained close, their breathing uneven, small shifts of movement beneath the coverings, then stillness again. The room held them all, quiet, unchanging, but the fire had lowered, its glow faint now, barely visible, a soft red resting beneath the ash. Not gone, not yet, only waiting. Willem remained still for a while longer, not deciding, not measuring, only feeling the moment as it was, the warmth beneath the blankets, the cool air beyond them, the slow rhythm of breath. Time passed, though it was not marked, only felt. In the quiet change of things, the cold moved gently, not with force, but with patience, from the edges, inward, a slow awareness, rather than a sharp sensation. And then, without urgency, he began to move, carefully, slowly. His hand slipped free, the blankets shifting slightly, the air meeting him at once. Cool, still, waiting. He sat up, not quickly, just enough. The room remained dark, unchanged, holding its quiet. His feet found the floor, the surface firm, cold, but steady beneath him. He stood. The distance to the hearth was small, and still. It took time. Each step measured, each movement soft, as though the room itself asked for quiet. When he reached the fire, he knelt. The embers rested there, faint, but present, a soft glow, not bright, but enough to begin again. His hands moved slowly, clearing space, arranging what was already there. The smallest pieces of wood, the lightest shavings, placed gently, nothing forced, nothing hurried. Then, breath, a soft breath, then another. The embers responded, not all at once, but gradually. A faint shift, a slight brightening, the smallest change. And then again, another breath, another moment, until something stirred, a thin thread of smoke, rising, fading, then returning again. The fire remembered, the glow deepened, and within it, a small flame appeared, not strong, not sudden, only present. Willem remained there, watching it, not expecting more, only allowing it to grow, in its own time. Behind him there was movement, Marta, rising quietly, drawn by the warmth, by the light that had returned. She came to stand near him, not speaking, only sharing the space, the moment. The flame grew slowly, steadily. The wood caught, the light returned, soft at first, then a little stronger, enough to reach the walls, to move the shadows once more. The room changed, not suddenly, but gently, the cold easing, not gone, but held back, just enough. And within that small change, everything settled again. Willem remained by the fire, not thinking, not measuring what had passed, only watching the flame as it moved, as it continued, just as it always had. She came to kneel beside him, and together, without speaking. They tended the fire, small pieces first, placed carefully, then larger ones, added slowly, each movement steady, each motion known. The flames responded in their own time, not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually. The glow deepened, the light returned, soft at first, then a little more, until the fire held again. The room began to reveal itself, faint shapes at first, then clearer, the walls, the beams above, the small spaces between them, all touched by the slow movement of light. Frost had settled everywhere, along the wood, across the surfaces, delicate patterns, still and quiet. Their breath moved through the air in soft clouds, rising, then fading, as though the room itself was breathing with them. The water bucket rested where it had been, unmoving, quiet, held in place by the cold. Nothing stirred, nothing needed to. Behind them, the children began to wake, not all at once, only small movements, shifting beneath the blankets, then emerging slowly, drawn toward the light. They came close to the fire, without being called, without needing to be told. And one by one, they settled there, near the warmth, near each other. The space around the hearth filled, not crowded, only close, each person finding their place, as they always did. No one spoke. There was nothing to say, only the quiet need to remain where the warmth could be felt. The fire moved steadily, reaching outward, touching hands, faces, the small spaces between them. The cold did not leave, but it softened, just enough. Time passed in stillness, not marked, only felt, in the slow return of warmth, in the quiet settling of breath. Willem remained where he was, not thinking, not measuring, only aware of the fire, the space, the presence of those beside him. Thoughts came and passed, not held, not followed, only drifting, like the smoke that rose and disappeared above the flames. Marta moved after a time, not quickly, just enough to step away, to check what needed to be checked. Her movements careful, quiet, returning again soon after, settling back into the circle of warmth. The morning arrived slowly, not with light, but with a slight softening of the darkness, a grey tone, barely there, filtering through the frost along the shutter. The world beyond remained distant, unseen, unnecessary. Willem stood for a moment at the door, opening it only slightly. The air outside met him, cold, still, unchanged, the snow resting where it had fallen. The village quiet, held in the same stillness. He did not remain there. There was nothing to search for, nothing to solve. And so he closed the door again, returning to the fire, to what was already enough. The day moved without shape, without urgency, marked only by small things. The fire being fed, the slow melting of ice, the quiet preparation of food, each task simple, each one repeated. The children remained close, their movements smaller now, their voices softer, not from fear, only from the weight of the day, settling gently around them. Elsa spoke from time to time, quiet stories, familiar words, enough to fill the space without asking for attention. Willem listened, not to follow, only to hear the sound of her voice, steady, present, part of the room itself. And when his thoughts drifted, they moved easily, not toward worry, not toward what could not be changed, only toward things already known. Warm days, open fields, moments that had come and passed and would come again in their own time. There was no need to reach for them, only to let them pass, as all things did. The fire continued, the room held, the day unfolded, slowly, without resistance. And within that quiet passage of time, nothing more was required. The memories came and went without effort, not separate from the present, but moving through it, gently, as though time itself had softened. He was both, the boy, learning, watching, and the man, working, enduring, not one or the other, but both at once. The years did not feel distant. They rested close, just beneath the surface, rising and fading, like breath in the cold air. There was no need to follow them, no need to hold on to them. They passed and returned in their own quiet way. And within that movement, there was something steady, something that did not change. Night came again, not suddenly, only as the light faded, slowly, until the room was once more held by the fire alone. The wood was arranged carefully, each piece placed with quiet attention, enough to carry the flame forward. Through the long hours ahead, they gathered together, close, as they always did. The platform held them, the blankets drawn in, the warmth shared between them, nothing separate, nothing apart. Marta's voice rose softly, familiar words, spoken without strain, carried gently through the stillness, a quiet asking, not for change, not for ease, only for strength, for endurance, for another day. The children repeated the words, their voices small but steady, and Willem listened, not searching for answers, not needing to understand, only allowing the words to exist as part of the moment, as part of the night. Sleep came slowly, in pieces, not all at once, a drifting in and out, between waking and rest, the fire, the breath, the warmth, returning again and again, like a rhythm that did not need to be followed. At times, he dreamed, not deeply, only lightly. Fields, open, warm, light that moved differently, sounds that belonged to another season, and then, gently, he returned, to the fire, to the room, to the quiet presence of the night. Beside him, Marta remained, awake or near it, her hand finding his again, without searching. A simple connection, steady, unchanged. No words passed between them. None were needed, only the quiet understanding that they remained together. The days that followed moved in much the same way, slow, unbroken, each one passing into the next, without clear beginning, without clear end, only marked by small things. The fire being fed, the water softened, the light shifting, just slightly. The cold remained, but something within it had changed, not gone, not lifted, only softened, by the smallest degree, enough to notice, enough to feel. The air no longer held the same sharp edge. The frost no longer reached quite as far. The stillness no longer as heavy. Willem noticed it without searching for it, standing by the window, his gaze resting outward, not looking for signs, only seeing what was there. The sky, still grey, but lighter in places. The snow, unchanged, but beginning to loosen, just slightly. Nothing sudden, nothing certain, only a quiet shift. And that was enough. The change continued, slowly, not from one moment to the next, but over many, until the roof began to release its hold, small drops forming, falling, one by one, the sound soft, steady, repeating, water finding its way again. The paths between cottages returned, gradually, the shapes of others appearing once more, moving, slowly, carefully, the village waking, not all at once, but piece by piece. There were losses. This, too, was known, not spoken loudly, not held in detail, only understood, as part of what had passed. And yet, life remained. The fire still burned, the walls still held, the family remained together, and within that, there was something steady. The days grew longer, not quickly, only enough to be noticed, the light changing, ever so slightly, carrying with it something softer, something warmer. Willem found himself watching, without effort, the stream, loosening at his edges, the trees, still, but waiting, the sky, open, quiet. There was no need to hurry toward what would come, no need to search for it. Spring would arrive, as it always did, in its own time, and until then, there was only this moment, the fire, the light, the quiet rhythm of days continuing, just as they always had. The signs came slowly, so slowly. They were almost missed, not all at once, only small changes, appearing, then fading, then returning again. A day when the air softened, just slightly, a moment when the cold no longer pressed as firmly. A faint sound carried through the stillness. A bird, somewhere, distant, but real. The sun appeared for a time, breaking through the clouds, not strong, not warm as it once had been, but present, and that was enough. The village began to move again, not quickly, only small things at first. Doors opening, steps taken outside, figures appearing, then pausing, then continuing again. The snow remained, deep, quiet, covering the land as it had for so long. But beneath it, something waited, something unchanged. Willem stood at the edge of the village, looking out, not searching, not measuring, only seeing. The fields stretched before him, still covered, still resting, but familiar. He did not need to see the earth to know it was there. He had known it before. He would know it again. The shape of the land remained, just beneath the surface, waiting. The cycle had not been broken. It had only paused. He stood there for a time, not thinking, not reaching ahead, only present, in the quiet space between what had been and what would come. Behind him, Marta approached, her steps soft, her presence known before it was seen. She stood beside him, close, as she always had. They did not speak. There was no need. The same understanding remained, steady, unchanged, carried through the winter, into this moment. The children came after, not running, only walking, slowly, settling beside them, their small forms wrapped in cloth, their movements quieter now, but lighter. The air had changed, only slightly, but enough. They stood together, looking outward, not toward anything specific, only toward what would come in its own time. The winter remained, but something within it had shifted. The weight had eased, the stillness had softened, and within that change, there was space again, space to move, space to breathe, space to wait. Willem felt it without naming it. Not joy, not relief, only something steady, settled deep within him. A quiet knowing that this season, like all others, had passed through its hardest moment. And that was enough. They turned back toward the cottage. The fire still burned within, just as it had before. Steady, unchanged. The same light, the same warmth, waiting. The days would continue, slowly. The light would grow, little by little. The snow would loosen, then fall away. The earth would return, not all at once, but in time. There was no need to hurry toward it, no need to reach ahead. It would come, as it always did. And until then, there was only this moment, the fire, the quiet, the steady rhythm of days unfolding, one after another, just as they always had.